Welcome to Humans of Diplomacy. Today I'm in Paris with my friend, Julien Pellaux, who is currently the Director of Partnerships at UNESCO. Julien spent over 20 years working for the United Nations, serving different UN entities, including, of course, UNESCO, but also UN Women, the UN Secretariat, UNFPA, and I think also ILO, the International Labour Organization. In this conversation, we will talk about the realities of navigating the UN system, the personal and the professional costs, and of course, as always, the state of international cooperation and multilateralism today. Julien, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
So to get us started, I wanted to ask you why you wanted to work for the United Nations. Was there a moment or an experience in your early life or your early career that shaped that choice?
Well, first, I have to say I grew up in Geneva, and so the UN is kind of part of our ecosystem.
You're Swiss, right?
I'm Swiss, yeah. I'm Swiss and Brazilian, so that's the other part I was going to get to. But I grew up in Geneva, so the international system is part of our ecosystem. I used to live actually very close to WHO, for example, or ILO. And so we grow up, I had a lot of students from UN staff in my classes. So the UN is really part of our lives. And very quickly, I got very attracted by this world because, as I was saying, my father is Swiss, my mother is Brazilian. I really wanted to study international relations, but I didn't really see myself joining the diplomatic service for either country. And I thought, well, the UN is really me, basically, because I can fully be my two selves, my two nationalities that are quite different, as you can imagine, in this environment. And truly, this is what I have lived over the last 20 years. But there is also one event that I want to highlight. When I was a kid, we were invited by UNICEF to come and plant tulips at the Palais des Nations, at the UN headquarters in Geneva, for the signature of the Convention on the Rights of the Child in the 80s. And that was really an important moment because they also explained to us what it was and the rights that are how our rights are protected also in international law. And it really kind of marked me, and I thought, wow, I really want to work for this kind of purposes.
Was the UNICEF particularly a goal of yours, or was it just the UN in
No,
general?
it was not UNICEF specifically. It was the UN in general, yes.
Okay. So when did you enter the UN system?
So I entered, so you see, maybe we'll talk about that, but there are very different ways of entering the UN system. And so it really depends what you mean by entering the UN system, because let's say my first full-time job with the UN was in 2005. But prior to that, I had done some consultancies, you mentioned, for ILO. And I had done also an internship, for example, at UNCTAD, the UN Trade and Development Agency. So I had already had some exposure. In 2005, I left for Kyrgyzstan, for UNFPA as a UN volunteer. And that was my first UN full-time experience.
What is the thing that surprised you most about international organizations and institutions? You had some kind of exposure you were mentioning where you were younger, but what is the thing that surprised you most?
Yeah, I think what we don't realize when we're outside of the system is the complexity of the system. I think we can get a sense of it because you look at the charts and you understand that, wow, it's super complex. There are all sorts of bodies, etc. But it's even more complex than that. I think the various layers, first the intergovernmental layer with governments, member states, basically deciding, setting the parameters for your work, for the policies, the decisions that they take and how to work within those parameters. Then there is the secretariat, quote unquote, but the agencies, basically, our own action and our own capacity to drive change and to do things, which sometimes are complicated or facilitated by the first layer. And then the third layer is really, like in any company or any organization, the management layers, the HR issues, the budget issues, and trying to manage all of these three things within the parameters that we have is really a really, really deep complexity. And I think it takes time to really understand, and still today, after 21 years, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but it takes time to really understand, how to navigate this system.
This is something that we'll get back to later, but do you feel like this is something that the UN should work on, this level of complexity?
Well, it depends what you mean when you say the UN, because I think the UN should work on it. And by the UN here, I mean the UN agencies, the UN Secretariat. But I think that member states ultimately should also work on it. And in the end, it's their leadership to transform the system. And I think that too often the system is criticized for things it cannot do, when in fact it is not enabled to do so by those who have created this system. So I think there is a need for a reset for sure. And for some deep transformation, but that has to be done at the right level.
Thank you. So you worked, we mentioned you working for multiple UN entities. Is there one of the mandates that is closer to your heart?
Well, of course, not just because it's you, no, and we work there together. No, but I think one mandate, regardless of which entity I've worked with, which has always been central, including at UNESCO, is gender equality. And, I was very lucky that I worked for 18 years with UNFPA, UN Women, or even when I was working on UN coordination, I had a strong focus on gender equality. So I was very lucky to be able to go deep into this agenda. And the reason why I think it has a special place in my heart is because I think it's a really transformational agenda at the community level, at the government level, but also at the personal level. And I think it's really about ultimately what we are trying to do also as the UN, which is for every person to be free. And I think for every person to be free, it starts by them being who they want to be, regardless of their gender and other, characteristics as well. But I think gender is the first kind of ascribed, if you like, a stereotype that we put on any person. And to free ourselves from that is extremely difficult, but it can be really transformational for the world, frankly.
And you were really at the heart of UN Women. I think your last position was head of office of the executive director of UN Women. So did you manage to see firsthand how transformational the UN could be when it comes to supporting the rights of women and girls?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound kind of naive. I don't think that one UN agency or one organization or one NGO or one politician can do it all. But I think that the UN, and when we were at UN Women at least, we had this sense of urgency and also this sense of, putting the responsibility where they need to be, starting with heads of state, all the way down to community leaders and the women themselves and the men also in these communities to try to provide a vision for change and an inspiration that things can be better if this is realized. And I think, whether we are satisfied every day with the work that we do, it's a different question. I think there are lots of limitations. Mm-hmm. But yes, overall, I was very proud to work, in such an organization with such an important mandate, and with a level of influence that very few organizations have, frankly speaking.
Great, thank you so much. So if you're okay with it, we're going to move to your current role as the Director of Partnerships at UNESCO. I'm privileged to follow you on LinkedIn. I encourage our viewers to do the same. Sure. But your job sounds really fascinating and very sexy from the outside. But can you tell us a little bit more about your daily life and what you do in your daily job as the Director of Partnerships for UNESCO?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting job. I mean, I'm really lucky because I think my job is, one thing that I really like with my job is the diversity. So there is no typical day because every day is going to be a little bit different. But this diversity, I get to do a lot of different things. Of course, I get to spend a lot of time with partners in meetings, trying to convince them of the importance of investing not just in UNESCO, but actually in the mandate and how they, through their own company, institution, government, can actually help advance this mandate and how we can help them in doing that. But I also spend a lot of time dealing with management issues, HR issues, business budget issues. We have also a lot of governing bodies and intergovernmental bodies in UNESCO, so I have to present to the member states. We spend time developing strategies, developing new approaches, consulting to make sure that those are really grounded in the realities of those that we serve. So I think there is a typical day. Unfortunately, sometimes the day are a little bit too long,
Or too short.
or too short to do everything we want to do exactly. But the beauty of it is that it's very diverse and very fulfilling.
So cultivating relationships with people is often seen as being central to, doing partnerships in general. How would you see that personal relationships help you solve, UNESCO's challenges?
Yeah. I think that, I guess in any job, personal relationships are really important. Obviously, you're going to do much better work with someone you trust, someone you like. I'm very lucky also even that throughout my career, I've built this network. And, you never know, you meet someone 10 years ago somewhere, you have a nice chat, and then suddenly this person reappears in your life 10 years later, and this person can help you, or you can help that person to unlock something or to develop something new. But I think when you talk about partnerships, it's even more important, because I think it's a lot about trust and how you build trust. And I think partners and the people that embody these partners, they want to feel that there is someone there, or several people that they can really trust and that really understands where they're coming from and is going to look out for their interests and their motivations and try to help them realize it. So that is a very important part of my job today, but actually it has been a really important part of all the different positions I've been in the UN.
One of my previous guests, Michael Muller, who's the previous Director General of the UN in Geneva, was telling me how important people were in the United Nations.
Yeah.
And because the institutions are not super strong, right? So you have to rely on people you trust. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, organizations are made of people. They don't exist if there are no people. So, I mean, it's the heart of what we do, is to speak to each other, to try to understand each other, to resolve disagreements, to have a common vision and try to push for this common vision in different ways with the knowledge, expertise, the tools that we have. So I think it's extremely important. And this is also why we have to remember that, I don't mean this in a negative way, but these are just people, and sometimes it's important when you disagree to be able to speak up and to say that, you have a different view, because maybe that person would not even have considered that view if you hadn't expressed it. So I think this is, human relationships, and it's complicated in international organizations also because it's every culture in the world, every country in the world. People come with different codes. And so you have to learn to find a common language. And that's both fascinating, but it can be complex as well.
Is there a partnership that you managed to create or start as the Director of Partnerships today at UNESCO that you're particularly excited about or proud of? I'm sure all of them are very important and they're all moving the mandate, but is there something that stands out for you?
Well, I wouldn't want to mention any because I don't want to upset anybody as well. But I think one thing that I'm proud of in my nearly 4 years now at UNESCO is to have managed to bring both a sense of continuity, because before I joined as the Director of Partnerships, I mean, the organization already had really strong and visible and successful partnerships. So, the idea is to be able to continue and build on that. And I think on some of those existing partnerships, we have managed to solidify them even more. And I think we are able to grow them because we were able to build on the foundations that we had, but also provide new directions, a new vision. And at the same time, I've also had the chance to open up new opportunities. And that is also great. Although I have to say, building partnerships takes really a lot of time.
It does.
And so, it also takes time to see the results. And sometimes also it's not very, very tangible, because this is another feature of any organization, is that you are a piece of the puzzle. But for example, my role is to build strong partnerships. And then I have other colleagues who are in charge of implementing those partnerships, implementing the programs that these partnerships support. And so you need to hand over, you need to bring in those colleagues, of course, to develop the partnership, but then you kind of take a back role and the colleagues take a front seat. And this is where you need to find the right balance between continuing to follow to make sure things work well, but at the same time, let others basically trust others to make a success out of what you have managed to bring to the table.
Thank you. Moving back to your experience in general, was there a moment in your career where you thought, wow, this work really, really matters? I'm sure there were many, but
yeah,
one
no,
in
there
particular.
were very many, and what is interesting is that I had the chance to work, as you said, in very different contexts and for very different organizations. So I've worked at the global level. Now, for example, with UNESCO, or previously with UN Women or UNFPA, I was also at headquarters for about 3 years. But I also worked in regional offices and field offices. And the successes that you will have, or the moments where you think, wow, here I'm really making a difference, can be very, very different from one to the other. So, at the global level, I think when we managed, in the middle of COVID to build the Generation Equality Forum together with France and Mexico to mobilize, governments at the highest level to commit basically and in a very action-oriented framework, quite complex, also bringing together civil society and private sector. I mean, people thought when we started this that this was, way too difficult to do. And in the end, when you see the results, you think, wow, that's great, that we managed to bring it to this point. But then there are also the more real things. For example, when I was in Kyrgyzstan, and this was not directly linked to my job actually, but there was some refugees from a neighboring country that took refuge in Kyrgyzstan, and they had to leave the region actually. And so UNHCR worked really hard to get them out, evacuated. It was very complicated politically, and the whole UN system was also mobilized. So this is how I was also involved indirectly. And when you see these people, when you saw these people leave, I was at the airport when they were boarding their flight, and their faces of relief and of also gratitude, frankly speaking, to UNHCR, to the UN, was really kind of a very touching moment, and you think, wow, we managed to change these people's lives, hopefully for the better.
Thank you. Just for our viewers, you mentioned the Generation Equality Forum. We had our first guest was Delphine O, who was the ambassador of France. So if you're interested in this issue and feminist diplomacy in general, I encourage you to watch that. You were mentioning Kyrgyzstan. Mm-hmm. Were you a happy UN volunteer?
Yes, I was a very happy UN volunteer. Yes. No, I think the UN volunteer program, I mean, at least when I was there, was really a great way to enter the UN. I know that you can also become a UN volunteer later in your career. Yeah, exactly. And more people should consider that, because I see a lot of people, for example, from the private sector who come to us and ask, how could I, I've worked all this career and I was selling, I don't know, whatever product. And now I want to do something more meaningful.
More impact, right?
And I don't care so much about the money. I care about the impact. And so, UN volunteer is a great way to do that. And for me, it was great because, it was my first posting abroad. It was, you still get a little stipend as a UN volunteer. So I had a very comfortable life, at the time. And it allowed me to have a great experience.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm moving to the harder moments.
Okay.
So has there been moments where you felt a bit discouraged about international cooperation, international development, or multilateralism in general?
Yes. No, of course. I think that if you don't, it means that you are not, that you don't care. Yeah. No, because the systems, this is what we were talking about earlier, the systems also has its limits. And sometimes it can be very frustrating because you feel you can do more. You feel you could be more effective. And again, as I was saying, also, you're in a big organization, you're one piece of the puzzle, so you don't hold all the cards. And sometimes you feel a little bit that what you're doing in some sometimes can be meaningless or kind of feed the beasts rather than really look for the results. But I think it's very important to recognize these moments. And, yes, of course, at some points I also thought maybe I should leave the UN, maybe I should do something different.
Can I ask you, what were the trigger, or was it?
Well, it can be. I mean, there wasn't like a particular trigger. I mean, I think it can be you're insatisfied with your job, you're tired, you have other things happening in your life. So there are different priorities that take over. But ultimately, for me, it would be very difficult to imagine myself working for another organization. I mean, I've been there now for a big part of my life, and I recognize the weaknesses and the constraints, but also the potential. And I still believe that we need a functioning UN. And so, everybody who is ready to invest into the system, try to make it better, also recognizing its shortcomings, is only a positive thing for the system. But yeah, there are some days it's harder to wake up than others.
Of course. So now we mentioned the internal issues, but also externally. Was there a moment in your career where a political or a geopolitical event has really shaken you or affected you personally or professionally?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to pick one. We were discussing before, and we were mentioning when the Taliban took over Kabul or took over the country, or when the war in Ukraine started, and we could name many other such moments in history and in the last, at least for the last 21 years that I have been at the UN. But one thing that I find really interesting is how close we are to these events. I think that it's one thing for you to see it on the news and see it as part. And yes, it may affect your life directly or indirectly, but actually, when you're in the system, it starts affecting your job directly. And it goes from a natural disaster in a country where suddenly a response is needed, and so you need to shift resources to be able to respond to that, or something bigger or more political or geopolitical. And that, really affects the dynamics, really affects the way you manage your time. And that is what is really interesting in the UN, is that even though, you, as I was saying, just a little piece of the puzzle, you still are directly connected to these big events that shake and shape the world, and that and it impacts your work, and that is what also makes it super interesting to be there.
Because you feel you have agency on what's happening, even if it's a little bit, very, very small agency, but you feel like you have some
agency, and you understand how is that going to affect my work, my organization, and then if you are in a position to make a contribution to help, resolve the situation, or at least contribute to a positive trajectory, let's say, you can do that. Not always, but you can at least try to do that.
And do you have a moment where that happened to you, where something happened, a disaster, or a war, or a humanitarian crisis that kind of affected your work directly?
Yeah, I mean,
all the time.
Everything that I mentioned, yes. Or even today, the war that is happening now in the Middle East, I think is affecting everybody in a way or another. But it's also affecting our work quite significantly. The work of UNESCO on the ground. So this morning I was in a briefing where our colleagues were briefing us on the situation on the ground, the type of security measures they have to take to protect their lives. But it also affects everything else. The resources, for example, that I help mobilize, the strategy has to shift a little bit. So everything is directly connected to the work that we do.
And do you feel like you ever had to do something that you were not comfortable with?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends a little bit what is meant by that question. But I think, so when in my job, when I was with UN Women, but that is just one example, I was in a position where I had to review a lot of legal cases, for example, that were related to HR issues. And these are very difficult.
You mean complaints?
Complaints and investigation outcomes and tribunal decisions and things like this. And, it's not that it was uncomfortable because of the nature of the decisions that were taken, but it's just that it's complex. You're talking about people's lives, and you get to see a lot of information that most people don't see, so you can understand the complexity of things. And then you have to advise, because I wasn't a decision maker, but you have to advise. And it's a very difficult exercise, and it was not my favorite.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And do you feel like the UN is good at, the HR processes in terms of internal issues and how we investigate them? And
I think that the UN is better than it is portrayed. I think that I don't know if we're good. I don't know if the UN is good. Is there room for improvement? Yes. I mean, there is room for improvement in every criminal system in the world, and every justice system in the world. And there is also that room for improvement in the UN. But I do think that, we hear often in the news, or let's say the general image can be of a inefficient, biased, corrupt, even maybe sometimes system. And this has not been my experience from inside.
Thank you. We often speak about, conciliating your personal and private, professional and private lives. And this is a question that is mostly asked to women, but I want to ask the question to you as well. Being an international civil servant and moving around all the time comes also with personal challenges that are related to family, etc. So is there anything that you want to say on that in terms of personal sacrifices that you had to make along the way?
Yeah, no, I think it starts what you said, to be uprooted from your country. It's a choice, right? So, of course, you're not going to talk about it in terms of sacrifice necessarily. But it's true that over the years, now, I left Switzerland, as I was saying, 21 years ago. You're far from your family, you're far from your friends, and to keep these connections alive, but also to have the whole support system, you get sick, you get children, and you're on your own,
That is the same thing.
Yeah, yes, you're on your own. You're
yes,
on your
you
own. And for example, when my first child was born, of course, my parents visited, etc. at some point, but it was my wife and I basically taking care of the kids, and so that is to an extent a sacrifice. At the same time, I was also very lucky. You were talking about reconciling work and life. I was also very lucky because I managed to create my own home, if you like, and that can be moved from one place to the other and still feel like a strong place for me and for my family. And when my first child, for example, was born, I managed through a combination of a lot of untaken vacation and some unpaid leave to take 4 months to be with my son after my wife finished her maternity leave. And I think
the policy changed now, right? So everybody
the policy
gets 4
changed.
months
At the time we got only 1 month, and then I added with some leave and some unpaid leave, and that allowed me to spend four months with my son alone. I mean, during the day, and that was really also transformational as a father. So the system also allows you these kind of opportunities, and that's a very positive
And
thing.
how about leading two careers at the same time? How did you feel that? Was it hard for you and your family?
Yeah, I mean, we were always very lucky. I think that the other person always found something that would combine with the other, but it can be a huge sacrifice sometimes. For us, maybe it was less the case, but I was also lucky that I have a wife that is flexible and tries to find her place wherever she is, and I try to do the same. Mm-hmm. So I think that works. But that for me that works. But we see a lot of families that really struggle, get separated for very big amounts of time with small children because there is not the possibility to be in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big sacrifice.
Yeah, that's a big sacrifice.
To have to serve away from your children.
Yes.
It's a big sacrifice that a lot of colleagues have indeed to make.
Yeah.
We're going to move to the future of diplomacy.
Okay.
And the future of the UN. How would you describe the state of multilateralism today?
Ooh, that's a big question.
You have 4 hours.
Yeah, exactly. How much time do I have exactly? That's what we're going to ask. No, I think I mean, clearly, I think there is a crisis of multilateralism. Everybody's talking about it for different reasons. But I see at UNESCO also maybe because the type of course, it can be also a very political organization, but ultimately it's a specialized agency working on education, on culture, on sciences, on freedom of expression, on oceans. And these are topics that everyone in every country cares about. And actually, I have found, coming, for example, from UN Women, where we had, you would remember, late nights, in the Commission on the Status of Women, for example, because member states couldn't decide on 3 words. I felt that there was less of that at UNESCO, for example, and that there was really a space for consensus that is quite remarkable. And so, and today, even with all the geopolitical complexities, you still see this spirit of cooperation and collaboration. And I see it at UNESCO, but I'm sure that my colleagues at WHO or in ILO also see it. It's not easy every day. Some of the discussions became more tense or more complex. But I find that, governments are still finding ways to speak to each other and have common interests in mind. And so in that sense, I think it's really important not to kind of throw the baby with the bathwater. I think it's really important to remember that there are a lot of things working in the system. And while the focus is a lot on what is not working or what could work better, and that's also important, it's also important to celebrate what is working and to build on it.
It's interesting because what you just mentioned about UNESCO, that the mandates are pretty consensual in general. Of course, I'm sure there are exceptions.
Yeah.
But still, there are some member states who are going, in and out, and so which, in the end, might also show that the problem might not be the international development, but the willingness of member states to collaborate
absolutely
with one another, which also comes down to this issue in the end.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think there are different worldviews about what is the role of the international system versus national interests.
But also a power issue, right? Who should sit around the table? Who should decide
exactly.
what? Who has the rights to be at the table as well?
No, absolutely. And, we face these challenges as UNESCO, as many organizations do. But in the end, I think, if you look at the results, the norms and standards that still come out of UNESCO, or for example, some conventions like the World Heritage Convention, enjoys a very high level of consensus. And even some member states that have decided to leave UNESCO have remained as a state party of the convention because they see value in it. So there are always points where you can look at where you still see collaboration and engagement. And again, I think we have to maybe communicate more on those and build on those as well.
Do you think there will be a UN in 20 years or 10 years? 20 years?
Yes.
Is it a hope or is it a prediction?
No, I think that there will be a UN, yes, for sure. Is it going to be the same functioning, the same governance, the same level of ambition? Maybe it will be larger, maybe it will be smaller. But I think that cooperation between states is essential, and that every government, regardless of their worldviews or their political views, understands that. So even the sharpest critics of the UN system, I think, would recognize the need to cooperate and to engage. We're so interconnected as a world today, and so I'm hopeful, but I'm also quite confident. I think that there will be a UN type organization still in 20 years.
Thank you. My final question for you, Julien. Maybe looking forward, what still inspires you about international cooperation? And maybe on a more personal note, what are your projects that you have for the future that excite you as a person, as a UN staff member?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, what excites me most, I would say, is that I think that we're still way below our potential as a system. and I think that yes, some things need to be changed, but ultimately the scale of impacts that an international organization can have is unparalleled to any NGO, even to any government in a way, because it's a pooled effort of multiple countries, and I really like. Someone from our World Heritage colleagues once explained to me, because, we all see UNESCO World Heritage sites, but we don't really know what it means. We think it's just like, oh, they recognize that it's a beautiful building or a beautiful place.
Isn't it what it is?
Well, it is often also the case.
Okay.
But the basic idea is to say this place is so important and has such a unique value and a universal value that it's not just the responsibility of this community or this country to protect and promote it and help develop it in the right way, if you like, but it's our joint responsibility as humanity. And that is a very powerful, I find, concept and something that people can really relate to. I think we have this in us as humans. And this is why, it excites me when an international organization can do big things that can impact billions of people. It's not every day, but over the years, if you look at still the successes of the international system, it's quite incredible that we as humans manage to build that level of cooperation and if you like, joint realization of our common ideals. So that's for the international cooperation. For the personal project, I mean, we have a new director general at UNESCO that just joined recently. He's very passionate about partnerships. And so I see a level of dynamism and engagements that is can be a game changer for the organization. So I'm excited about about helping to rethink, maybe do new things, continue the good things that we're doing, and to have that support from the top. It was already the case before, but as a newcomer, I think he's particularly engaged, and that's really positive for me, but not just for me, but for the entire organization, for my team, for all the colleagues working on that in the organization. But I also think that it's important, I'm also at a phase of my life where I want to find the right balance, basically, also with my personal life. I have two kids, two young boys, 9 years old and 5 years old, just about to turn. And they grow fast. They grow fast. And so it's also really important to find time with your family and make sure that you're present and fully present.
Do you find that you're very busy today? Like, do you travel a lot? Is that something that is an issue? Not an issue, but is present there, has a weight on your family?
Well, actually, travel, I haven't, of course I had travel, like, I have to travel, like, it's part of my job. But it has not been that, I don't travel that much. Okay. But I think what takes time is more the day-to-day.
The hours?
And the hours, yeah. And so, staying very late in the office, and then you come home and your kids are already in bed, or spending weekends in the office and not spending them with your family are things where, sometimes it's necessary. You have everybody does it in the UN, but outside of the UN as well. But you have to be careful to make sure that this does not become a day-to-day reality, yes. And so, I think, and also being sure that you're connected with the world, with people who are not in the UN, that's really, really important. And I'm lucky that we live in Paris and I get to meet a lot of people who have nothing to do with the UN. And that show me that, the world can be very different. And you can lead a very different life. But that is also a reality that we need to understand as international civil servants, because these are also the people that we indirectly serve.
Thank you so much, Julien, for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on this podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you so much for watching this episode with Julien Pellaux. If you enjoyed this episode and if you're interested more generally in humans of diplomacy, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. There is also a newsletter where we will get more insights from the interview and from other interviews and other colleagues who are working on diplomacy and international civil service. And until next time, thank you for watching.